Tonight, the final four-way face-off in the fight to become Prime Minister.
So the stakes are very, very high.
Canada is not for sale.
Now is the time for hope. I am the leader we need.
Trump is a bully, and you do not give 1 inch to a bully.
The hits and misses as candidates take the stage one last time before the Liberals choose a leader. Why a top Donald Trump aide had to issue this denial.
We would never, ever jeopardize our national security, ever, with allies like Canada.
After alarming reports of his alleged scheme against Canada.
I still miss him. I see him in my dreams.
The emotional toll of a war, the distress of a looming deadline for Ukrainians in Canada, and new signs of a pact between Washington and Kyiv.
It could be $1 trillion deal, it could be whatever.
Plus, what Canadian tourists want you to know after their dreadful tropical vacation.
It was probably the worst 12 hours of my life.
And is the future of cars ready for takeoff?
You can cut your commute at least in half.
When fantasy turns into reality, will it fly?
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening. The fate of the four candidates in the race to lead the Liberals is now in the hands of the party after tonight's final face-off in Montreal. Let's get straight to CTV's senior political correspondent Michael Couture, who was watching tonight's English language debate. And Mike, like yesterday, the tone fairly friendly, fairly cordial. But where did we see the sharpest exchanges and who came out on top?
Yeah, it's interesting because we had heard before this debate a number of the campaigns saying they really wanted to make sure that they would differentiate themselves from the others, and that was seemingly the goal. We had heard early on that Karina Gould may take more jabs, maybe not full punches, Omar, but certainly she did, and she focused it on the presumptive frontrunner, Mark Carney. Listen to this exchange.
Mark, you talked about reaching NATO targets, but of all of us on stage, you plan to reach those not until 2030, but the imperative to do that is now.
I said by 2030.
Right.
And I said when I said it that we will do faster if we can deploy it faster in Canada. This is a management point. This is a core point about delivering security. And that is the issue, not just pushing money out the door.
And Mike, they were all at one point talking about one person who wasn't on that debate stage, that of course being Donald Trump and the threat coming from the U.S.
Yeah, exactly, and that has been the focus of this Liberal leadership as well. Who would be the best person to take on Donald Trump? Because we know the next person who wins this Liberal leadership will also be the Prime Minister of Canada, so that is one of the job descriptions that they will have to really take care of. It's interesting, though, we heard more from Chrystia Freeland today, taking shots at Pierre Poilievre as well, but certainly the other two candidates that we have yet to hear from in this report did have very pointed comments specifically about the U.S. president. Have a listen.
I'm going to go fly down and meet President Sheinbaum of Mexico. It's a very strong, smart lady. And I'm going to make a deal with her and say, look, we need to stand up together to Mr. Trump. He said he's putting 25% tariffs on both of us. He can't do that. It'll destroy his economy. So we need to call his bluff. And then what we need to do is take off the table what was already given for nothing, which is the work that we were going to do on our border for $1.3 billion and the work that she was going to do on her border.
A smart Canadian strategy needs to start with looking for allies, working in the first instance with Mexico, Panama, Denmark, and the EU, who all face the same sovereignty challenge.
And Omar, throughout this leadership process, nearly 400,000 Liberals have signed up to vote in the leadership contest and to decide who will become the next Prime Minister of Canada. They will have tomorrow. That's when the voting will open at 8 a.m. and they'll go all the way until March 9th at 3 o'clock, the same day that they will unveil who will be the next Liberal leader. Omar?
12 days to go. All right, Mike, thank you for this tonight. And the provincial Liberals in Newfoundland and Labrador are also looking for a new leader after the Premier announced his surprise resignation today. And he said Donald Trump factored into his decision.
We're looking at 4 years of erratic, crazy, bonker behavior by the President of the United States. So if I thought that the tariff thing was going to be solved in days, and maybe that would have changed things.
Andrew Furey, who has been premier since 2020, said he is not a career politician and will be returning to his job as an orthopedic surgeon. He will stay on until the party chooses a replacement. The 49-year-old is the second Atlantic premier to resign within a few days after Prince Edward Island's Dennis King stepped down on Friday. Donald Trump's trade advisor responded to a report today that the administration wants to push Canada out of a pivotal intelligence sharing pact. But as CTV's Judy Trin reports, the denial hasn't entirely quelled the concerns.
A North American trade war is likely to start on March 4th, when the U.S. president slaps 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods. Oil and gas will be hit with 10% tariffs.
We're on time with the tariffs.
Adding to the alarm, the Financial Times, citing confidential sources, reported that Donald Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, is talking about removing Canada from the Five Eyes intelligence alliance.
It is a surprising comment considering the contribution of Canada to the Five Eyes alliance, not only today, but also in the past, and I would even say in the future.
Navarro denied the report after it was published.
That was just crazy stuff. We would never, ever jeopardize our national security, ever, with allies like Canada.
But that doesn't calm the waters for this former national security advisor.
But then I'm still thinking, while we may not have a fire here, we may have some smoke, and some serious smoke.
Blocking Canada from getting intelligence from the U.S., United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand was discussed during the last Trump administration.
I don't want to exaggerate, and I certainly don't want to get into specific cases, but this was always out there as a potential weapon that could be used.
Trump wants access to natural resources in the Arctic and is repeatedly threatening Canada's sovereignty.
A lot of people in Canada are liking becoming our beautiful, cherished 51st state. They'll have to pay much lower taxes. They'll have the ultimate security.
Trump's advisor says he wants to annex Canada while he's in power. If not this term, his team is strategizing how to extend the Trump presidency beyond 2028. Omar.
Judy Trin in Ottawa. Judy, thank you. There is word tonight that Ukraine has agreed to a deal to give the U.S. some of the money from its rare earth minerals. But asked what Ukraine would get in return, Trump said this.
$350 billion and lots of equipment, military equipment, and the right to fight on.
But it appears Trump was referring to what the U.S. has already provided, which is actually around $119 billion. When Trump was asked specifically about future security funding, he said Europe would largely be responsible for that. On the ground, more than 3 years after the Russian invasion, the dominant question is, when will the horror stop? CTV's Adrian Gobriel reports from Ukraine again tonight.
The hum of air raid sirens and the pounding drum of war have reverberated across Ukraine for 3 years and counting. In search of refuge, some young Ukrainians like 14-year-old Alexandra Antonenko have turned to music.
It's comforting me and I'm like going to another world.
On February 24th, 2022, when she was just 11 years old, Alexandra and her mother were forced to leave their hometown of Kharkiv. Her father, Dmitry Antonenko, stayed behind.
He joined military the first day.
6 months later, mother and daughter received an early morning phone call from the military.
And I had to call my grandma and tell her that her son is dead, and it was like the worst conversation I've ever had.
Stories of sacrifice can be found across Ukraine.
This is our reality. It's not great, but we're going to get through this.
Canadian-Ukrainian Patricia Marushchuk left her family in Winnipeg nearly 3 years ago to help lead an NGO.
What's that sacrifice been like for you?
I've missed out on a lot with my family. I feel some guilt on that, but they're very supportive.
The mother of two works with Finn Church Aid. Recently, they've been helping build bomb shelters in schools, even assisting in turning this underground subway platform into a classroom.
There's 5 schools that have been built inside the subway stations in Kharkiv. Yeah, kids want to go to school.
Though all the resilience and humanity Ukraine can summon doesn't erase the pain of sacrifice.
I still miss him. I see him in my dreams. All I have to say is thank you and I love you.
Alexandra's father is one of hundreds of thousands of soldiers who've been killed on both sides of this conflict. The UN believes that the lives of more than 12,600 men, women, and children have been stolen since the Russian invasion began. Omar.
All right, Adrian Gabriel in Kyiv tonight. Adrian, thank you. Back in Canada, tens of thousands of Ukrainians could see their emergency visas soon expire. And as CTV's Alex Carper reports, that has many anxious about their futures.
Tetiana Motsiuk has worked in a Ukrainian kitchen in Winnipeg since she arrived last March, but with work permits set to expire on March 31st, she is concerned she could lose what she has.
I'm worried, so it's a problem for me because I have a little daughter.
To make matters worse, Motsiuk's Ukrainian passport is also set to expire next year, and with the ongoing war, she cannot get a new one.
I want to try to have PR.
Many Ukrainians like Motsiuk who came to Canada on a 3-year emergency visa are now facing an uncertain future.
Yeah, it's quite difficult in general.
Tetiana Khariuk also arrived in Manitoba from Ukraine last February and is keeping an eye on the situation. This video is provided by Khariuk's grandma in her hometown of Liman in eastern Ukraine. Her house was completely destroyed, leaving her and many Ukrainians not having a home to go back to.
My apartment was bombed. My grandmother's house was destroyed completely. It's very difficult.
Over 1 million Ukrainians applied for temporary residency in Canada. Close to 300,000 Ukrainians now live in Canada following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022.
It could affect their access to healthcare, their access to education, their ability to work, obviously, and we're worried that it might force people to work illegally.
As of right now, there is no plan to extend work permits for Ukrainians living in Canada. Back in January, Immigration Minister Mark Miller said Ukrainians can apply for an open work or study permit to extend their stay here in the country as temporary residents. Alex Carper, CTV News, Winnipeg.
In other news, a close call at a Chicago airport this morning after a Southwest Airlines plane narrowly avoided colliding with a private jet. This is the heart-stopping moment. The Southwest flight needed to abort its landing to miss a business jet that did not follow instructions not to cross the runway. The two aircraft less than a kilometer apart. A trial against 4 suspected Hamas members who allegedly plotted attacks in Europe began in Berlin today. The men are accused of organizing weapons for attacks against Jewish targets across the continent. Back at home, the RCMP has rescued 5 people attempting to cross illegally into Quebec after a tip from U.S. Border Services. A suspected smuggler and driver were arrested after RCMP used a Black Hawk helicopter during the 8-hour operation. As the opioid crisis continues to claim thousands of lives each year across Canada, provinces are exploring different ways to combat the problem. CTV's Kathy Lee on one approach critics are questioning.
Happier moments frozen in time. Venetia Briault longs to go back to this with her 2 sons. Both, now in their 20s, are battling addictions and have for many years.
They've been in and out of treatment. They've been in and out of detox. Yeah, it's been brutal. It's been brutal.
The drug crisis continues to devastate the country. Latest federal data shows more than 49,000 Canadians have died from toxic opioids since 2016. Last year, the majority of deaths happened in BC, Alberta, and Ontario.
In Alberta, a different approach to combating the issue. The UCP government plans to build 2 mandatory drug treatment centers and put forward legislation that allows families, doctors, and police officers to force someone into treatment.
The petition will then go into a commission. That commission is going to have a responsibility to actually verify that civil liberties are being protected.
Involuntary treatment is already allowed in BC under the Mental Health Act. Last year, the province announced plans to expand that care for those with addictions issues. One expert questions the effectiveness of a mandatory approach.
On the balance, it shows, more negative outcomes than positive outcomes for people.
Brialt believes a more detailed plan needs to be put in place.
I'm not saying let's not do this. I'm saying let's think it through. And in the meantime, let's fix some of the holes in the system.
The current system, she claims, has failed her sons.
When I'm out on the street walking around looking for my boys, it's horrible out there.
But no matter how horrible it gets, she will never give up on them. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Calgary.
Coming up.
It was probably the worst 12 hours of my life.
How Canadian families fell violently ill vacationing in Mexico. A massive blackout plunged Chile into chaos today, leaving millions without power. Subway service was suspended in the capital of Santiago as passengers tried to evacuate through darkened tunnels. The outage also interrupted operations at the world's biggest copper mine. The government says one of the transmission lines of the country's electrical system was disconnected. A pair of Canadians who live provinces apart are sharing the troubling details of their experience at the same resort in Mexico. CTV's Andrew Johnson on what happened to them.
Inside their Maple Ridge, BC home, Sheena Robinson and her family are still trying to recover from their Mexican vacation.
It was probably the worst 12 hours of my life.
Vomiting and diarrhea that 6 days later has still not completely settled down.
I have zero appetite. Every time I eat, my stomach goes back into the same situation.
The family checked in at the Sandos Playa Car Resort in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, a week and a half ago to attend a wedding with 30 others. Within a couple of days, almost the entire group was ill, and they say waiting hours for clean towels or bedding.
What is going on? We are so sick. We need help. No one's helping us, and they didn't really say much other than I'm sorry.
Unbeknownst to Robinson, at the peak of her illness, Winnipeg's Joel Boyley, his wife, and 2 young children were also at the resort and also hit hard.
2-year-old got hit first Friday evening, and it's been 11 days, and he's still going to the bathroom every hour. We're kind of waiting on tests to see exactly what it is.
Boyley was hired to photograph a wedding at the resort, part of a large group that, like Robinson's, was almost entirely incapacitated.
We've seen diagnosis from people in our group that showed positive norovirus, but also positive parasites, E. coli, salmonella, another one I can't pronounce.
Both Boyley and Robinson claim health authorities eventually showed up at the resort and shut down the main buffet restaurant. Boyley says he has since connected with hundreds of travelers online who have shared similar stories after recent stays at Sandos Playa Car, and he alleges there is negligence involved.
There were no warnings, signs. We don't see anybody cleaning down there.
CTV News reached out to Sandos Playa Car and did not receive a response, but the resort is responding to negative Google reviews, saying, in part, "We are aware of the importance of maintaining the safety of our valued guests in the face of viral outbreaks that have occurred in some countries and that, unfortunately, have affected several hotels in the destination." We did receive a response from Air Canada Vacations, which says it is monitoring the situation in Playa del Carmen and has been assured by the hotel it is safe after an inspection of water, food, and beverage outlets revealed no issues. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Vancouver.
Still ahead. Which foods you may have in your pantry are sparking new health warnings. There is a new lethal link between common foods many Canadians keep in their pantries and their health effects. Here's CTV's Heather Wright.
Delicious by design, but also deadly, according to new research.
So we know that these products are not of a good nutritional quality. We know that they're harmful to health. This study shows how much they're harmful.
Roughly 37% of all new coronary heart disease and stroke cases and 38% of all deaths from these diseases are related to the consumption of ultra-processed foods, according to a new study from the University of Montreal. Products that fall into this category include sugary cereals, chips, and candy, items that are far removed from their original state. UPFs have little nutritional value and include ingredients that are difficult to pronounce. They differ from minimally processed or processed foods, which have fewer ingredients and include things like whole wheat bread and olive oil. Experts say ultra-processed foods are specifically designed to be overconsumed.
They have different characteristics that makes you eat more and more, so you will overconsume them compared to real food.
Still, dietitians say balance is key, and eating healthy doesn't mean passing on every potato chip.
We should always aim to get more whole foods in our diet, but we have to be realistic of what that looks like and not, get mad at ourselves because we're allowing our child to have a chip every once in a while. That's okay. What does the rest of that child's diet look like? That's going to be more important.
The study also found cutting back can make a real difference. If Canadians decrease their consumption of ultra-processed food by 50%, it could prevent 45,000 new cases of cardiovascular disease and 8,000 deaths every year. Omar.
All right, Heather, thank you. Still ahead, a new future glimpse where the rubber meets the sky. A California startup is close to unlocking a pioneering piece of future tech many have dreamed of since the Jetsons. And while it's not quite ready for the road, it's gearing up to take off. CTV's John Venevelli-Rao explains.
Flying cars have long been the stuff of sci-fi movies, from Blade Runner
Yeah, but I thought we were flying. Precisely.
to Back to the Future. But could this turn Hollywood hype into highway reality?
For people who see it for the first time, it's like first you see it in kind of science fiction movies, you read about it, and now you actually see it in person. So that's a wow effect.
The Silicon Valley startup behind it, hoping to lift imaginations, showing its flying car prototype actually taking off and flying for about 30 seconds. The company's CEO boldly comparing it to the Wright brothers' first flight.
In a sense that it proves to the humanity that the new mode of transportation is possible.
Aleph Aeronautics has been working on this for about 3 years, until recently only shown off at car shows firmly on the ground, and taking to the skies only in computer animation, but now demonstrating it to the media, though with major restrictions. Reporters couldn't get up close or peek inside.
It raises a lot of questions. So I'm wondering, how real is this?
Early adopters sure hope it's real. The company says it's secured more than 3,000 pre-orders. The cost to buy, $430,000. It's not alone in the race to the skies. Dozens of companies are working on flying taxis and cars, though most look like helicopters, which makes this stand out.
We all want to be able to fly over the traffic instead of in the traffic. We want to be able to get to our destinations quicker.
The company has soaring dreams of solving gridlock and wants to start production next year, though some think it's all still a flight of fancy. John Venevelli-Rao, CTV News, Toronto.
A fun ride. That's a snapshot of this Tuesday for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Good night and see you tomorrow.